Buses. We know them, some people ride them, we love them. Alright, maybe that last bit isn't exactly true, with the exception of a small part of the population, but if you've ever travelled around Melbourne, you've probably come across one of these. Buses. They're almost everywhere. At the time of writing, there are approximately 346 different bus routes operating across Melbourne, and given we have so many, you'd think we'd have the operation of bus services down to a fine art by now. After all, some of our bus operators have been running services since the 1960s. However, the operation of Melbourne's bus network is not great, to say the least. Despite how much people complain, I think Melbourne's public transport network is actually pretty good. And I know just by saying that, the comment section is going to get flooded with a bunch of people saying how terrible Melbourne's public transport is. Great. Anyway, I think that on the whole, we have the bones of a pretty good system, but any system will always have its weaknesses. I'm in a pretty fortunate position where the closest public transport mode I have access to is a tram line which runs at a 10 to 15 minute frequency for most of the day, and is very reliable. Hint, I've talked about this line before. But for most people, buses are the closest form of public transport serving them, yet they are the weakest part of our transport network. Now, I don't normally go on rants. I find complaining about stuff to be very mentally draining, but I think the current state of the bus network in Melbourne really warrants a good old-fashioned Tekkie's transport tirade. God, I've got to think of a better name for that. So in this video, I'm going to go through how the bus network is operated, how low frequencies and limited operating hours have really hampered patronage, and how we can fix this absolute schmozzle we've created. I'm also going to take a look at the good parts of the bus network as well, you know, just to be fair. Firstly, let's have a look at how Melbourne's bus network is operated, just to add a bit of context. Buses in Melbourne are operated by private companies, a lot like how the rail and tramway networks are operated. And this is a situation which has existed basically since time immemorial. These private companies are contracted by PTV to operate services, employ staff, and maintain their fleet of buses. Ticketing is handled by PTV, who handle fares across all modes of transport in Victoria, ensuring that all ticketing is consistent, with some exceptions. And all regular route buses are fitted with Myki readers. In the early days, the different operators were mostly family businesses, who only operated a handful of routes each. Rationalisation of these operators began in the 1980s under the Kane Jr. government in an attempt to make operations more efficient and cost-effective, and this also made it easier for the government to negotiate contracts, as you can expect. This policy, often referred to as go or grow, has led to a consolidation of operators, and this process has continued up until the present day. So that's how we got to the current operational situation today. Now onto the big question. Why are buses in Melbourne so bad? Firstly, let's have a look at the obvious reason: frequency. The frequency of bus services in Melbourne is, for the most part, pretty bad. At best, most individual bus routes run at 20-minute frequencies, similar to the off-peak frequency for most suburban trains. However, remember, this is at best. Most routes run at frequencies exceeding 20 minutes, and in fact there are even a few routes that run at frequencies exceeding an hour in 2025. Ridiculous. This is also before you take traffic into consideration, which can make the timetable extremely unpredictable, and I'll talk more about that a bit later. What this ultimately means is that if you catch the bus, you need to time your journey really carefully, because if you miss your bus because it came early or you were running late, you have a long wait ahead of you. Adding to this, where buses stop at suburban stations, particularly those with a bus interchange, one thing you should expect is a reasonable connection time between the train and the bus, and vice versa, especially on routes which terminate there. However, as most suburban bus routes run on frequencies exceeding 20 minutes, the connection time at suburban stations is almost completely random. So in most cases, if you get off the train at a suburban station and wait for the bus, there's a good chance you may end up waiting a while. This is something that really crushes the viability of using the bus, because if the bus timetable doesn't align with your travel plans, the bus just isn't an option, and in some cases it might even be faster to walk. After all, why wait an hour at a bus stop when you can just walk? It'll probably be quicker. Building on what we just talked about, let's talk about operating hours. Unlike on the railway and tramway networks, which have consistent hours of operation, Operating hours on the bus network are completely inconsistent. Some routes don't operate on Saturdays and/or Sundays. Some routes cease operating at specific times while others operate all night, and there are also some routes which only operate at night, i.e. the night network. This can be very confusing for passengers and can sometimes result in people being stranded in certain places. Say for instance you're in Safety Beach and you want to go to St Andrews Beach at 4 p.m. for some reason. You would need to catch the 788 down to Rye and then change there for the 786 to take you down to St Andrews Beach. That specific bus you would be getting on to head from Rye to St Andrews Beach departs at 4:45 and just so happens to be the last service of the day. Here's the problem. You need a way to get back home. The last service of the day on the 786 towards Rye leaves St Andrews Beach at 3:33 p.m. This means you're stranded in St Andrews Beach until 10 a.m. the next morning, which is when the first service of the day departs. These kinds of operating hours really crush the viability of using a bus in some circumstances, as you could easily end up stranded somewhere. It's quite baffling to me that there are still bus routes which stop services this early. I mean, it'd be understandable if they stopped services at sometime like 8 p.m, which even then might be a bit early, but 5? Really? That's way too early. As a side note, I would like to point out that there are some bus routes that don't need to be operating all day, like the university shuttle routes for example. But for most routes, they should at least have the same operating hours as the railway and tramway networks. In addition to this, there's one other thing we must talk about when it comes to operating hours, and that is Sunday operation. Compared to other days of the week, Sunday operation on the bus network is really stripped back. There's quite a few routes which don't operate at all on Sundays, but in some cases it's perfectly justified, such as for routes which serve industrial or semi-rural areas like the 384, which runs through an exclusively rural area between Whittlesea and Kinglake, and the 482, which mostly serves industrial estates in Tullamarine. However, most of the lines which don't operate on Sundays don't fall into this category. A lot of them are just ordinary suburban bus routes, and in fact, some of them even serve shopping centres, which are quite popular places on weekends. It's quite baffling that there are routes serving these places which don't operate on Sundays, especially since weekend patronage as a whole is growing. I'd say the reason this practice still exists is mostly due to historical inertia. Sunday trading only really became a thing in 1996, but it seems that the timetables for a lot of routes still run on the prehistoric assumption that nothing is open on the weekend, and haven't been altered to keep up with changing travel patterns over the decades. Times have changed, but the bus timetable just hasn't. I would also like to point out that historical inertia isn't the only reason for this. There are other factors which influence this as well, such as a lack of government funding for these services. Now, if you're going to wait an hour for the bus, it'd probably be good if it actually shows up on time. However, buses often don't run on time, as buses run on roads. Roads get busy. You can figure out the rest. Due to their very nature, buses can easily get stuck in traffic, and on most roads there is a lack of priority for buses, leading to delays which can make buses very unpredictable. Over recent years there has been a push to partially solve this problem by adding bus lanes on certain major roads, which can help minimise delays caused by road traffic. However, on most bus routes, the current situation is still hardly ideal. It's one thing having to wait an hour for a bus, but it's another thing having to hope and pray that said bus will actually show up. Building on this, one way other cities have solved this problem is by building busways. Now, if you're from Melbourne, you're probably asking, Tekkie, what is this foreign technology you speak of? Well, it's a good thing I'm here to explain. Busways are roads dedicated exclusively for use by buses, and are essentially the epitome of bus priority, allowing buses to fly along completely unimpeded by road traffic. Busways actually aren't a particularly uncommon thing in Australia. Brisbane is well known for its extensive busway network. Sydney has several busways, two of which are referred to as transitways, or T-ways. And Adelaide has the O-Bahn, which is a guided busway and is in fact the only one of its kind in Australia. If you ever go to Adelaide, you should check that out. It's really, really cool. However, Melbourne never really jumped on the busway bandwagon, and we've never really considered building any. However, that changed just a few years ago when construction began on Melbourne's first ever busway, which I'll talk about later on in the video. Now, if there's one thing that anyone would want from a bus network, it is routes which are clear, concise, and not overly complicated. However, you can probably tell based on the tone of this video that this is absolutely not the case. Here in Melbourne, we have some bus routes which are unnecessarily complicated and in some cases just downright confusing. And as an example of this, I present to you the 566. It runs from Lalor to Northland via Greensborough and is an all-around weird route. It starts out pretty simple, running down Station Street past Lalor Station and then down Charles Road through Epping and Mill Park all the way to Plenty Road. From there, it runs down Plenty Road past University Hill and Bundoora Square and then down Grimshaw Street to Greensborough Station. But from here, things get confusing as the route actually doubles back on itself, heading back down Grimshaw Street to Fry Street in Watsonia North. What this means is that on the section of Grimshaw Street from Fry Street to Greensborough Station, you have buses on Route 566 running in both directions on both sides of the road, which is extremely confusing for passengers. Not to mention it also makes the route really hard to look at on a map. The line then turns onto Fry Street and snakes its way through the back streets of Watsonia North, eventually ending up on McCorner Street before the line crosses itself at Grimshaw Street. The line then continues along Watsonia Road to Watsonia Station, where it then turns onto Greenwood Drive and makes its way back onto Plenty Road. It continues along Plenty Road as far as La Trobe University, after which the line turns onto Dunn Street and runs through Kingsbury. At the western end of Dunn Street, the line turns onto Boulderwood Parade and runs through the back streets of Reservoir. It then finds its way back onto Boulderwood Parade before turning back onto Plenty Road yet again, which it follows as far as Tyler Street, after which the line then runs through the back streets of Preston to the terminus at Northland. So, as you can see, this route is a complete and utter mess. It takes a very indirect route, loops back on and crosses itself, and winds its way through minor back streets, and this means it takes a very, very, very long time to get from end to end. And as a person who has actually travelled on the route from Bundoora to Northland via Greensborough, trust me, it takes forever. There is a much more direct route to take if you want to get from Bundoora to Northland in the form of the 382, but again, frequency. It runs on a 30 to 60 minute frequency, and I think the reason I ended up taking the 566 was because I just couldn't be bothered waiting any longer for the 382. There are also lines like the 548 which take different routes depending on the time of day, and there are also routes that are even more confusing, such as the 699 in the Belgrave area, which I'm not even going to begin to talk about because even I don't understand it. I mean, look at this thing, it looks like something I drew in kindergarten. I'd say a lot of these routes were probably formed by combining a number of shorter routes in order to save money, which in the case of the 566 is exactly what happened. Now, this might have been great for operators, but it's just left a complete mess for passengers. Now, we can't do a video on buses in Melbourne if we don't talk about the SmartBus network. SmartBus is a network of high-frequency bus routes which was first proposed in the late 1990s by the Kennett government and began to be implemented in the early 2000s under the Bracks government. The current network consists of 9 routes, 2 crosstown routes, 3 orbital routes, and 4 express routes to Doncaster. The key aspects of these services include extended hours of operation, more frequent service, improved timetable information, and improved priority on certain roads in the form of bus lanes and traffic signal priority at certain intersections. The 3 orbital routes are Route 901 from Frankston to Melbourne Airport, Route 902 from Chelsea to Airport West, and Route 903 from Mordialloc to Altona. The 2 crosstown routes are the Route 703 from Middle Brighton to Blackburn, and the Route 900, which is a limited stop service from Caulfield to Stud Park Shopping Centre in Rowville. Finally, there's the 4 Doncaster area rapid transit routes, which all operate to and from the city via Victoria Parade, Hoddle Street and the Eastern Freeway. Routes 905 and 908 go to the Pines Shopping Centre in Doncaster East, with Route 905 going via Bulleen and Route 908 going via Templestowe Lower. Route 906 goes to Warrandyte, and finally Route 907 goes to Mitcham Station. Now, you may notice we've skipped a number. If we order all the SmartBus routes by number, you'll notice that there's a number missing. The numbering jumps straight from 903 to 905. Where's Route 904? Well, the 904 was supposed to be the 4th orbital route. It would have exclusively served the inner suburbs and was planned to run from Sandringham around to Williamstown, but it was de-scoped in 2008 and hasn't been mentioned since. The 904 could be added to the network in the future as that number has been left vacant, however there hasn't been any movement on it in over a decade. Now, you're probably wondering, what makes SmartBus so special? Why are these routes so superior to most other bus services in Melbourne? Well, for starters, services are more frequent. Frequencies on these routes are higher than what you see on most ordinary bus routes. These frequencies vary throughout the day in response to varying demand. I'm just going to list them on screen to make it easier to understand. You can pause the video if you want to read them more thoroughly. But the important thing is that between 6:30am and 9pm on weekdays, frequencies range between 10 to 15 minutes depending on the route, which is substantially better than what you see on most ordinary suburban bus routes during that same time period. The introduction of the SmartBus routes also saw the introduction of some revolutionary new technology to the bus network. Real-time passenger information displays were installed at major stops and list the next departure for each route. These come in different forms, ranging from tiny LCD screens embedded in the signs to these very prominent overhead signs, which are also capable of displaying departures for connecting train or tram services if required. Well, when they're actually working. There are also passenger information displays inside the buses themselves, which announce upcoming stops. These help with wayfinding and also come with the added bonus of ensuring the bus doesn't stop unnecessarily because of passengers who don't know when their stop is. Bus priority measures are also much more common on the SmartBus network. A lot of major roads which SmartBus services travel on are fitted with bus priority measures such as bus lanes and queue jump lanes at intersections. Certainly a major improvement compared to the rest of the bus network. Also, while we're talking about some of the key aspects of SmartBus, I think we should probably mention the elephant in the room, the 703. Notice anything odd about the 703? I'll spoil it for you. It's the only route in the SmartBus network which isn't numbered in the 900 range, and there's a reason for that. It's actually not fully a SmartBus route. The 703 was one of the routes that was upgraded to trial the SmartBus program back in 2002. However, only the section north of Clayton Station was upgraded. The trial was obviously successful, but the 703 was never fully upgraded and still has a lower level of service compared to the rest of the SmartBus network, particularly on the section from Clayton to Middle Brighton. Now, bus service in most parts of Melbourne is pretty poor, but there is one part of the city where bus service is actually pretty decent. It's an area I've talked about once or twice on this channel before, and it's called Doncaster. Bus service in the Doncaster area is really an example of bus service done well. The city of Manningham is an area which has been isolated from the suburban railway network since time immemorial. While the area east of Templestowe and Donvale is much more rural in nature, cough cough Warrandyte, areas around Doncaster and Bulleen are very much developed suburbia, and in fact, Doncaster is even home to one of Victoria's largest shopping centres, Westfield Doncaster, formerly known as Doncaster Shopping Town, which is really what puts the suburb on the map. There have been numerous plans to build a railway to Doncaster over the years, dating back to 1890, which I've made a dedicated video on if you wish to check that out. Construction actually started on a line to Doncaster in 1974, but high costs led to construction stalling and the corridor beyond Bulleen was ultimately sold off in 1984. Because of the lack of any other transport mode serving the area, buses fill this void, and this unique set of circumstances has led to a level of bus service seen nowhere else in Melbourne. 7 of the 9 SmartBus routes serve this area, including all 3 of the orbital routes, and these really act as the backbone of bus service here. Each of the SmartBus routes generally operate at 10 to 15 minute frequencies for most of the day on weekdays, and they all serve different parts of Manningham, meaning that no matter where you are in the area, there's always a high frequency bus route not too far away. 4 of these routes also go straight into the city, those being the 4 DART routes, the 905, 906, 907 and 908. I've already made a dedicated video on the DART if you want to watch that, but the short story is that these routes provide a fast and reliable service into the city from Manningham. They're used quite heavily by commuters travelling into the city, and they were designed specifically with that in mind, essentially filling the role of the Doncaster line. These routes make pretty decent time into the city, utilising dedicated bus lanes provided along Hoddle Street, Victoria Parade and Lonsdale Street, as well as on the Eastern Freeway where the emergency stopping lane doubles as a bus lane. There are 2 park and ride facilities located in the area at Bulleen and Doncaster, the latter of which is currently closed until 2028, where commuters can dump their cars. They're almost like railway stations, just, on a budget. These park and rides even have facilities which rival a lot of railway stations. I mean, the Doncaster park and ride had a waiting room, toilets, and even a customer service desk. Some railway stations don't even have these things. These bus stations also use railway station-esque signage. I mean, just look at this totem sign at the Doncaster park and ride. That just screams railway station, but we're on a budget. It looks like a railway station, it acts like a railway station, but it's not a railway station. Additionally, bus service to this area is set to improve in a few years' time, unless you're watching this in the future, in which case this improvement has probably already happened. You'll notice earlier in the video I mentioned that at the time of writing, Melbourne is building its first ever busway. Well, as it so happens, Doncaster is going to be at the eastern end of this new busway. The Eastern Busway, originally known as the Doncaster Busway and later the Eastern Express Busway, is being built as part of the North East Link project and will run parallel to, and partially on, the Eastern Freeway from Hoddle Street to the Doncaster Park and Ride. It's set to open in 2028, along with the North East Link itself, and will see big benefits to bus services which currently run on the Eastern Freeway, particularly the 905, 906, 907 and 908, as they will mostly be separated from road traffic. The Park and Ride at Bulleen was built as part of the project, opening in April 2023, and was the first part of the North East Link project to open to the public. The existing Park and Ride at Doncaster is also being completely rebuilt and upgraded as part of the project in order to integrate it with the new busway. The old Park and Ride closed in January 2025 for 3 years to allow the rebuild to commence, and for the duration of this closure, buses are departing from temporary stops on Doncaster Road. Essentially, the only thing that's changed is you can't park your car there. Although, if you need to park your car, you can just use the new Park and Ride at Bulleen, and in fact, this closure is why the Bulleen Park and Ride opened a full 5 years early. However, once the new Park and Ride opens along with the new busway in 2028, commuters using the facility will now have a nice big fancy new multi-storey car park, additional departure platforms and a new waiting area. Certainly a major improvement on how it was before. In addition to the SmartBus routes, there are also a bunch of non-SmartBus routes serving the Manningham area, and these operate at about the same level as most bus services elsewhere in the city. But all in all, bus service as a whole in Doncaster is pretty good compared to most parts of Melbourne. However, all that being said, buses need a makeover. Badly. In fact, makeover is a bit of an understatement. A more accurate term would be reform. So, what can we do? Firstly, we need to improve frequency. On a lot of routes, buses operate on frequencies ranging from 20 to 60 minutes, and that just cannot continue as it is. Frequencies on most bus routes should be increased to at least 10 minutes or even 20 depending on location, and weekend frequencies should also improve, including for the SmartBus network. Most SmartBus routes run at 30-minute frequencies on weekends, which is woefully inadequate, and should definitely be improved to 20 minutes or better, which would put it in line with frequencies on the railway network. In addition to this, every route should be operating 7 days a week. An exception could be made for school bus routes and the university shuttle routes, as they don't really need to operate every day of the week at regular frequencies, for obvious reasons. But for most regular bus routes, they should be operating every day at minimum. The second thing to do should be to increase bus priority around Melbourne in the form of more bus lanes and more priority at intersections. These changes would allow buses to travel faster and would avoid the reliability issues that come with buses getting stuck in heavy traffic. Thirdly, where buses pass suburban train stations, every effort should be made so that buses connect with a suburban train, albeit that may not always be possible. Changes should also be made to a number of routes to straighten them out, and we should also increase the distance between some bus stops to speed up journey times. Some bus stops are really closely spaced. Just look at this example in Bundoora, and having bus stops this close together is just unnecessary and slows the bus down. Finally, we should definitely improve the appearance of some bus interchanges. This one goes particularly to the Altona North Park and Ride, but can also apply to other bus interchanges like the La Trobe University terminus and a lot of railway station bus interchanges, which have structures that are pretty dated and ugly, if they even have any at all. Finally, there is one thing our bus network needs most of all, and that is a change in our perception of buses. The general attitude towards taking the bus is generally that of annoyance. Ugh, I have to take the bus. I know, I had this attitude once too. I, like many Melburnians, barely use the bus network. I'd rather take a 30-minute tram ride to a railway station 8 kilometres away than take a 15-minute bus ride to my closest railway station. Buses are often viewed as inferior, and something you only use as a last resort if you can't drive or if there's no other public transport mode nearby. If we want to improve bus ridership in Melbourne, We need to change our attitude towards buses, and if we couple that with the kinds of changes I've already outlined, we could really transform our bus network into something truly amazing. If you enjoyed this rant, be sure to like the video, and also subscribe while you're at it. Feel free to join the Discord server, link in the description, and if you think I missed anything, feel free to comment down below. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.